Good evening and welcome to everybody. Welcome to our regulars and also our first timers. If this is your first time, a warm welcome to you. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and I am again the MC for this evening. Also visible on your screens are David Adler, President of the AJA, as well as our guest for tonight, Anan Kheir, who we will introduce formally in a moment, and he also has a couple of guests who he will introduce through the evening. Tonight's topic, of course, is a very interesting one for us. It's all about the Druze community. And what we're going to do tonight is, rather than have an interview style, we have a presentation by Anan for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So for those that are not familiar, the way to indicate that you want to ask a question is to raise your hand electronically. You can do this on the reactions or the participants icon at the bottom of the screen. There's a little picture of a hand. If you click on that, we get a signal that you want to ask a question. The chat function is available as usual, but as I always ask, please keep to tonight's topic. Okay, so like a number of other ethnic groups in the Middle East, such as the Kurds, the Druze live in several different countries, separated by borders drawn after the breakup of the Ottoman Empire in the early 1920s. But unlike the Kurds, who are largely Muslim, the Druze are a unique religious and ethnic group. Their tradition dates back to the 11th century and incorporates elements of Islam, Hinduism, and even classical Greek philosophy. The Druze community in Israel is officially recognised as a separate religious entity with its own courts, and they have jurisdiction in matters of personal status, such as marriage, divorce, maintenance and adoption, as well as spiritual leadership. Unlike other Arabs of the region, the Druze chose not to embrace mainstream Arab nationalism in 1948 and integrated into all aspects of Israeli life. Anan Kheir is a lawyer and lecturer, a managing partner of the Druze Veterans Association and legal advisor to the Israeli government's Druze Heritage Centre. He joins us tonight to fill in the gaps on all this information. Anan Kheir, welcome to the AJA, and it's lovely to have you.
Well, thank you, Alan. Good evening, everyone. It's good afternoon from Israel, actually. Allow me first to introduce myself, although Alan did a really good job in that. My name is Anan. I'm 40 years old. I live in a very special place called Peki'in village in the Galilee in the north of Israel. In fact, it is so special that it is the only place in the Middle East where Druze, Jewish people, Christians and Muslims have been living side by side in the same village for many centuries. I am happily married to Hiba, and together we have two daughters. One is 9 and one is 5 years of age. I run my own law firm with 2 branches, one in the north in Pekin and one in Jerusalem. I have a degree of law from the University of Hertfordshire in London, in the UK. I have a degree in internal auditing from the University of Haifa. I've studied business administration, I've studied accounting, and over 30 professional law-related courses in Israel and outside Israel. Before COVID-19, I had an office for meetings in Sofia, Bulgaria, where I provided legal services to several companies, obviously most of them Jewish-owned. I am the legal advisor and the managing partner, as you introduced, of the Druze Veterans Association. I also provide legal services to a government subsidiary called the Druze Heritage Centre. Now, I would like to share a PowerPoint slide. Let me see how I can do this. Okay. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Indeed. Now, it is a great privilege and an absolute honor to be chosen to address you today about a topic which is the core of our day-to-day life in Israel. We're speaking about the covenant between the Druze and the Jewish people. As you mentioned, before I start, I have two guests of honor who I asked to join this meeting. The first one is Shadi Abu Faris. Shadi is a retired officer. He served in the IDF for almost 3 centuries. He retired at the rank of colonel. At his last posting, he was in charge of the minorities in the IDF. He fought many wars and battles and did many things that would definitely make him a 007 candidate. But I would leave that for him. I also have Sami Bibar. Sami is one of the promising youngsters amongst the Druze community and in Israel in general. He's 22 years old. He's an officer in the IDF. He is the first lieutenant in the intelligence branch, and he's currently also studying law as well. In 2016, at the age of 18, he was chosen as one of the 20 promising youngsters in Israel. It is a great honor to have Sami with us as well. Now, it is symbolic that this lecture about the Druze and the Jewish people that I'm about to address and focus on, it is very symbolic, as I said, that it is to take place during this tough period where for the last few weeks, in Israel, we've been the subject of terror attacks, and not only from outside, but unfortunately also from inside by Arab citizens. Now, this stresses that the only minority that has been considered to have a blood and life continuous, unconditional covenant with the Jewish people are us, the Druze minority. Now, as the title of the lecture suggests, the Jews and the Druze have a very strong and deep covenant. In fact, this covenant is so strong that it is commonly referred to as the blood covenant. And in recent years, it is also referred to as life covenant. Why is it called a blood covenant? It is called a blood covenant because Druze soldiers and Jewish soldiers fight together in the wars of Israel, defending the state of Israel. Now, before we speak of this covenant, we should first learn about the Druze. As you live in Australia, you may or may not have heard of us. So I'll give you a little background. Now, who are the Druze, one might ask? Where did they come from? We will start with a general information. The Druze are a very special religious minority in the Middle East. The Druze religion is sort of very isolated and very secretive. The Druze are situated mainly in Syria, where we have almost 800,000, in Lebanon, roughly 400K, in Israel, about 143,000, and in Jordan, we have 30,000. Druze communities can also be found in Australia, in Venezuela, in Argentina, Canada, the USA, and many other parts of the world. These communities were formed mainly by refugees from Lebanon and Syria who fled the civil war that began in the late 70s of the 20th century. These are the numbers, as I said. Now, fertility measures of the Druze stand on 2.1 which makes us similar to the Jews. Now, unlike Arabs, our numbers are not increasing dramatically. Most families today have one or two sons or daughters plus a dog in most of the houses. In the 1960s, it used to stand on 7.1. So we dramatically increased in terms of figures. 81% of the Druze live in the North District of Israel. 19% live in the Haifa district, which contains two villages, famous villages, Isfia and Daliat al-Carmel. We have 19 villages in all and 4 villages in the Golan Heights. Since 1956, the Druze serve in the mandatory service in the IDF. As of today, the Druze hold the highest percentage of the army service recruitment. We have above 83% of the youngsters over 18 who serve in the army, and the vast majority of them go to serve in combat units. On the other hand, for example, only 67.1% of the Jewish youngsters go to the army. So we're about 20% above them. The Druze are said to be very brave fighters and soldiers. For those of you who fought side by side with the Druze soldiers, you probably know what I'm talking about. For me as a Druze, I know why this is so. We believe in what we call fate. We believe that every person has a fate. If God has a written plan for me, and if he has written for me to die on a certain day, then I will die on that certain day, be that in a combat, or be that sleeping next to my wife, or be that driving. In other words, as the elderly Druze say, when the hour hits, you will die. The second reason is because we believe in what we call reincarnation, and I will speak further about reincarnation further on in the lecture. Historically speaking, the Druze initially the Druze religion was open to anyone who is willing to join. It was open between the years 1017 and 1043. Invitations or da'wah were sent back then to all corners of the globe, including but not only to India, China, and many other regions. Now, you would say, why on earth were invitations to join this minority group, this new religion, or da'wah as we call it, why were they sent? Well, the answer is very logical, really. The answer is to give equal opportunities to everyone. So at the end of the days, no one can say that I did not know, I wasn't given a chance. Now, in terms of marriage, I see that there's a PowerPoint slide that was deleted, but I'll speak about it anyway. In terms of marriage, the Druze cannot marry a non-Druze. This is not acceptable religiously and also socially. If you marry a non-Druze woman or non-Druze partner, you will be denied by the community. You will be seen as an outsider. So what do the Druze believe in? The principles, I'll speak about the principles and beliefs, so you have, so you know what I'm talking about. We believe in all prophets, in all the prophets that God sent to earth. We believe that they came to deliver the same message, the message of peace, the message of love, the message of the one God. All the prophets came, as I said, to deliver the same message. That's what we believe in, that's what we are taught. The message of believing in the one God, the message of respecting others. Now, two of the most fundamental rules or beliefs of the Druze faith are what is called in Arabic Hifz al-Ikhwan and Siddiq al-Lisan. Siddiq al-Lisan, the latter, is telling the truth. One must always tell the truth and be truthful in what you say. Hifz al-Ikhwan is interpreted as you must look after your family, after your religion, and after your land. Every Druze member must go by these principles. We have a unique flag, which is, as you can see it on the screen, the Druze, we have our own flag. The flag consists of 5 colors. These colors have spiritual meanings, and they represent values. As you can see on the screen, the green color represents life and land. The red color represents loving, hearing and loving and respecting others. The yellow represents the sun, the power that we get from the sun, and the wheat in terms of what the earth gives us. The blue color represents obviously the sky and in believing the God, and the white represents the light. You might see it in another form, not only a flag, as if you look at the screen on the top left corner, you might see it in the form of a star as well. It represents the same values. Bigamy is not allowed according to the Druze religion. One must marry one partner only, one woman, unlike Muslims, for example, who are allowed up to 4 women. One wife is enough for us. The Druze religion equals the woman with the man. The man has no advantage whatsoever over the woman. In fact, the Druze woman has more rights than women in other religions. For instance, in divorce matters, we are the only religion in which the woman can divorce the husband without having to seek his consent. Now, once divorced, they are forbidden for each other. They cannot be in touch, unlike other faiths. They cannot be in touch at all and cannot remarry each other. Druze cannot marry, obviously, a non-Druze. We only marry Druze partners. Now, I said that we'll speak about reincarnation further on. Reincarnation, we believe that the soul can reincarnate into another body. A man can only be reincarnated into a man. A woman can be reincarnated into a woman. A human can only be reincarnated as a human and not as an animal. The logic behind this is very irrational, really, if you think about it. At the end of the days, when one faces God and is to be judged for his acts, if you are, for example, disabled or blind, how can it be expected of you what is expected of a non-disabled human? What about the poor? What about the homeless? What about other people who have less money, less health? So the logic, when you face God, you would have gone through all these situations, so you'd have no excuses whatsoever for your actions. This was a brief look at the Druze religion and its principles. Now we shall move on to the link between the Druze and the Jewish people. I'll turn the slide off and we'll carry on just speaking. I'll take it from here. Excuse me for a minute. Now, The bond between the Druze and the Jewish people is both historical and spiritual. People tend to mistakenly think that the bond between the Druze and the Jewish people started or began with the forming of the State of Israel. But no, the link or the bond between us started in the days of Prophet Jethro. The Druze, as I said, believe in all of God's prophets, but one of our highest in importance is Prophet Jethro, who we refer to as Nabi Shu'aib. Jethro is called the priest of Midian and became the father-in-law of Moses, as you obviously know, after he gave his daughter Tzipporah in marriage to Moses. It was Jethro who encouraged Moses to appoint others to share in the burden of ministry to the nation of Israel by allowing others to help in the judgments of smaller matters coming before him. Now we have evidence that the covenant between the Druze and the Jewish people was maintained throughout history. I'll give you an example from a book that I recently read. Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela was a famous traveler in the medieval history. He was a famous Jewish traveler in the 12th century. Benjamin of Tudela visited Asia, visited Europe, visited Africa in the 12th century. His vivid descriptions on Western Asia preceded those of Marco Polo by 100 years. With his broad education and vast knowledge of languages, Benjamin of Tudela is a major figure in medieval geography and Jewish history. His works, as you might know, are well respected up to these days. He has many books. In one of his books that I read, he referred to the area of the Galilee. Now, this is where we come through. Now, he wrote, I'll remind you, in the 12th century, he wrote that in the Galilee, almost 900 years ago, in the land of Galilee, he came across small minority who called themselves Druzians, and that they are very friendly to the Jewish people. So we have this is evidence that in the 12th century, the Jewish people and the Druze people, who were both minorities, I think, were very friendly. Now the Jews the Jewish people have gone through the terrible Holocaust, and they were very vulnerable and far from being strong. The Druze back then, I'm talking about now about a recent history, the Druze back then were also very weak and hit. In the 1920s, I'm talking about, sorry, I got confused for a minute in speaking. In the 1920s and 1930s, before the establishment of the State of Israel, the Jewish people were very, as I said, weak and hit, and the Druze were also weak and hit. We were both far from being strong. The Druze back then were chased by the rest of the Arabs, most of us. Now, Riyad Ali, the reporter of the Israeli national television, explained in a televised report that in the 1930s, the Arab Liberation Army placed the center of command in his village, in Maghar village, near Tiberias. The Arab infidels searched the houses of the Druzes, and his grandmother, as Riyad Ali explained, was taken by her parent to their Christian neighbors. Their neighbors took her in and put a cross on her neck in order to hide her Druze identity. Now, does this resemble something? I'm sure it does. What I'm trying to say is that while the Jews went through the terrible Holocaust, the Druze were having tough times of their own here in the land of Israel, in the land of the Galilee. Then the Druze, our leaders, had two choices. either to go with the Arab infidels to fight the Jews and prevent the establishment prevent them from taking over areas, or join, or on the other hand, the other choice is to join the weak party, who are the Jewish party, who, as I said, were having gone through the Holocaust, the terrible Holocaust, and go against the odds. The Druze obviously we chose to go to continue this bond and to go with the Jews, the Jewish people, side by side. The contacts between the Druze and the Jewish leadership were made through Labib Abu Rukun from Isfia and Saleh Khnefis from Shfar'am, who both became members of Knesset after the establishment of the State of Israel. The Druze leaders did not, as I said, consider any other options. They joined the Jewish people. As Riyad Ali, the reporter that I quoted, said, the Jews had Baron Rothschild to dish out money and to put for whatever is needed or is necessary. Us, the Druze minority, did not have a Rothschild of our own. We did not have money. We used to be farmers back then. So we paid our part in this union with the Jewish people with the blood of our youths. The Druze, the Druze, have been serving. We've served side by side with the Jews voluntarily since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Now, between 1940 and 1948, the bond between the Druze leaders and the Jewish agency and the Haganah became very strong. So strong that in 1948, the Druze helped the Jewish forces to take control of some areas in the Galilee. Now, recently, speaking about the Galilee and taking areas, recently in the Druze Heritage Centre, which is a government subsidiary, I came through a very old paper that states that soon after the establishment of the State of Israel, there was a meeting in Nesher between the Druze leaders, Druze sheikhs or religious people, and between the leaders of the State of Israel, the newly formed State of Israel. And they said that because if it wasn't for the Druze forces, the Jewish people might not have thought about taking over the Galilee. And thus, they offered to give us a stake of the leadership of the State of Israel. They said, you should be, by law, because you're a minority, by law, we should have you in the Knesset and we should have ministers, Druze ministers continuously. But our leaders said that all we are asking for is to live with honor in our lands and to respect our religion. And that's what is done in the State of Israel. Now, there were two main events, one in Yagur and one in Yanuhjat, in which the Druze fought bravely. And if it wasn't for the Druze, these areas would have fallen to the Arabs. This is perhaps a subject of another lecture. It is very astonishing to read what had gone through these times in 1940s and 50s. Now, anyway, Reda Mansour, he's a Druze poet, historian, and diplomat. He's currently serving as an ambassador in Panama. Explained in his book, Dr. Reda Mansour explained in his book that we are the only non-Jewish minority that is drafted into the military, and we have an even higher percentage in the combat units and in officers than the Jewish members themselves. So we are considered a very nationalistic and patriotic community. In 1956, the mandatory army service for the Druze was legislated. And since that day, all the Druze youngsters are obliged to serve in the IDF. This excludes females and excludes religious people. If you are religious, you don't have to go to the army, and if you're a Jewish female, obviously you don't have to go to the army. In 1957, the government of Israel decided to recognize the Druze as an independent minority, and therefore separating them from the rest of the Arabs in terms of the country. In 1962, the Druze Courts Act was legislated, giving us, the Druze community, a court of our own to deal with marriages, divorces, and religious matters. I want you to think about it from an outside, from outsiders. When the Druze tied their faith with that of the State of Israel, the Jewish people were very much hated by the Arabs globally. Saying the words Jew or Israel was almost a sin. Now, despite all of that, there came the Druze being part of the Arabs and said, we go side by side with the Jewish people, with Israel, and against what is expected. That was something that caused us to be absolutely hated by the Arabs worldwide. I mean, for some fanatics even said that killing a Druze soldier is even better than killing a Jew. Muslims in the surrounding villages, of the surrounding Druze villages, used to say that it is a matter of time until the Jews are defeated, and then we are going to take your homes and take your assets and leave you to die like dogs. In 1967, the Arab radios, in 1967, there was the Six-Day War, obviously. The Arab radios, especially the Egyptian ones, used to lie to their people by saying that the Egyptian army is at the outskirts of Tel Aviv, and that Israel will be gone forever in a matter of hours or days. The Muslims who lived in our areas, surrounding the Druze villages, as my grandfather told me actually, were singing and dancing, and were already planning who will take which house from the Druze people in which village. Despite all of that, the bond between us and the Jewish people was strong, and it continued. Today, when the Arab world understood that the only way forward is to make peace with Israel, they look at us as an example to the Druze minority, and as a living proof that there is such a thing as living with the Jewish people and with Israel. In other words, it is argued that the presence of the Druze contributed to the peace processes. Now, as I always say, I cannot finish a lecture about the covenant or the blood and life covenant between the Druze and the Jewish people without mentioning the nation law, or what is called in Hebrew, Chok HaLeom. This law, the nation law, which was legislated in 2018, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, is very problematic, and has caused an anger within the Druze community and within the minorities in general. It does not provide the minorities, especially us as a special minority who we've been with Israel side by side since before history. It does not provide us with any rights or any basic rights. Now, the nation law categorizes citizens in Israel into two categories, Jewish and non-Jewish. The State of Israel, I'll remind you, is a democratic state. It was formed as a democratic state, and the Declaration of Independence states so. Now, the nation law overrides all of this. Unlike in Australia and in the UK, Israel does not have a written constitution. In fact, I don't know if Australia does have a written constitution, but the UK does not have a written constitution. So this gives this law, which is a basic law, as opposed to regular laws, a constitutional weight. Now, given that the nation law is a basic law, it makes this with such legal weight that eventually the courts in Israel will have to start interpreting the regular laws in light of this basic law. Now, most of the nation law that we oppose is of declarative nature. We do not have a problem, for example, with the vast majority of the sections. We agree that Israel is a Jewish state. As I said, we help forming the state of Israel as a Jewish state. We agree, we have no problem, and we agree that Jerusalem is and should always be the capital of Israel. We do not have a problem with the state being open for Jewish immigration. We do not have a problem with the Hebrew calendar or the Independence Day or on what day the Independence Day should be celebrated. It is our Independence Day too. But we have many problems with Section 1C and Section 7 of the law. Section 7, as a lawyer, I'll tell you that it states that the state of Israel views the development of the Jewish settlement as a national value and will act to encourage and promote its establishment and consolidation. And Section 1C states that the right to exercise national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. Now, as I said above, in 1957, the Druze were considered to be a separate ethnic group, so we're not Arabs. So in this law, we feel left out. We understand the rationale behind it, but we feel left out. It does not provide equality and democracy. We say that for us as a Druze minority, we say that the Declaration of Independence takes care of all the minority rights. Thus, it should be a basic law. Now, some say that this law marks a dramatic fracture in the relationship between the Druze and the State of Israel. I read it in Haaretz, which is a left-wing, obviously, paper, that, as I said, a dramatic fracture in the relationship between the State of Israel and the Druze, whilst others say that the relationship and the loyalty of the Druze to the State of Israel is similar to supporting a football team. Even if the team drops from this league to another league or loses, you still love them with all your heart. So that's how us, the Druze, view the State of Israel, and that's how we think it should always stay. For me, subjectively, personally, I tend to think that this is a political crisis and not more than a political crisis, because the law does not affect the relationship between the Jewish people, the normal people, and the Druze people who live side by side and together in the State of Israel. It is a crisis between the relationship of the State of Israel and its minorities in terms of politics only. Now, this brings me to the end of the lecture. I hope I wasn't boring, and I hope I was clear.
Thank you, Anan. Do you want to introduce your guests to us now, or a little bit later on?
Yes. I have, as I said, Shadi Abu Faris. I would like Shadi to. Shadi was a colonel in the IDF, and he was in charge of the minorities. And I would like him to say a few words about the minorities and the Druze minorities and the other minorities in the IDF. Shadi, are you with us?
Okay. Hello, everybody. You hear me?
Loud
yes,
and
all
clear.
good. All good.
Hello.
Great. Shalom. It gives me a great pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for having me. But to be honest, please don't compare my English with Anan. Please. It's not fair, you know. Okay. I'm Shadi Abu Faris. I was retired from IDF after 28 years served. I live in Isifia village, village in the Carmel mountain close to the city of Haifa. To be honest, I think my village, also like Kheir, they have an important role in the cooperation between the Jewish community and the Druze community. A lot of like leaders from the Jewish community has like asylum in our village, like Abahushi from Haifa. He was around 1 month our village during the British mandate. I married and have 3, Daniel, Lynn, and Razi. My wife Rula is in the special needs teacher in my village. I have BA in the history of the Middle East from Haifa University and the MA from Tel Aviv University in public policy. Most of my military career, I was in combat units. I served in the Lebanon War II as the commander deputy of the special unit of the Druze community. In addition, one important position was the deputy of the National Training Center for the ground forces. And my last position was the head of the administration of minorities. In this position, our goal was to integrate minorities in the IDF and in the security forces in general. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shadi. We'll go to questions. I have 1 or 2 of my own, and I'll ask you the first one, Shadi. I understand that the Druze are very nationalistic to the country that they're living in. So you, as a soldier, if there was a war between Israel and, say, Syria, you could be pointing your weapons at Druze in Syria. So is that something that would bother you, or how would you approach that situation?
As Anan said, we live in faith, and we know that in every countries around us, we have soldiers, because the Druze don't have like to be in their country. So we know that we have soldiers in Syria, soldiers in Lebanon, but we don't care because we believe in faith. And also for this, the Druze community reach for peace, because we don't be in this trouble situation. But I tell you, I served in the Lebanon War II. My own feelings were how I will protect Israel.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you, Shadi. I've just got one question for Anan, if I may, and then we'll go to Ron, Saul, Jeff, and Terry. Anan, you mentioned and you explained very well how the Druze are very religiously connected, very tightly connected. I'm just wondering about politics. Do the Druze have a particular political view as a group, or do we see the same as everywhere else, where they range from the right to the left?
We are not different than any other groups in Israel. We have people from right to left, but most of the Druze voters tend to vote for right-wing parties. In fact, in the last elections, Gantz, who was a center party, not right, not left, had a Druze woman in his list to the Knesset, who was a member of Knesset as well, Ghadir Mreh, and thus most of the Druze in the villages, in the surrounding villages, voted for that party. But in general, we do not. It's not. Everyone has a subjective feeling, subjective way, from right to left.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, we'll go to the audience questions now. So those of you, I think you all know the drill. Please keep the question short. And please, just one question. We'll start with you, Ron, so unmute yourself and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for a very interesting presentation. And Shadi, thank you very much for your service, which we appreciate very much. I would like to know if there is a dialogue between the Galilee Druze people and the Druze community on the Golan that seems to be more attuned towards the Syrian government. And because they seem to be more loyal there. And is there a dialogue going on between the two communities?
Thank you, Ron, for the question. I believe you're referring to the Israeli Golan Heights, not as opposed to the Syrian part. The Golan Heights were taken. The Golan Heights people, they're considered to be in a unique situation. The older people used to live under Assad and under Syria, and thus they are still scared that one day they might go back to Syria. And because of that, they consider themselves, or at least show that they have Syrian roots. Now, on the other hand, we have the youngsters that were born in Israel. These people, I know many of them. I have personal connections with many of them. These people consider themselves Israelis. They have Israeli ID. They say, in fact, in the early 2000s, Barak, I think Ehud Barak, when he was a prime minister, he negotiated with the Syrians over peace, and one of these terms was handing back the Golan Heights. I know many accountants and lawyers who came to Haifa to buy flats and looked for lands in our villages because they're not willing to go to Syria because they consider themselves Israelis. Now, the big question is, at what point in the future will they consider themselves so Israelis as to integrate in serving in the IDF? This is a question, that we will have an answer for it, I think, in 10 or 20 years.
Okay, thank you. Saul, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Could I ask you a very interesting talk? Could I ask you one thing, though? You mentioned the low birth rate that the Druze have. And since Baha al-Din stopped proselytizing in 1043, do you see the Druze being able to continue if people really keep to all the tenets of Druze religion? Will they be able to continue, or will they die away because you're very strict about that? No invitations, no proselytism.
Well, thank you, Saul. This is a good question. But I can assure you that although the graph of the birth rate has been somewhat lowered, but the graph has not been flat. So we are still increasing. We're not dying away. We're still increasing. We're not at a rate as the Muslims. We're increasing at the same rate as the Jewish people increase in the state of Israel. And thus, I don't think that there is any chance of us going away in the near future.
Excuse me. I want. Okay. By the way, the Druze believe in reincarnation. No reincarnation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bear that in mind.
So it's one of the reasons why we are not afraid for your question.
Okay. So just on that, Anan. I mean, is the Druze religion very uniform? I mean, in Judaism, of course, we've got a range from Orthodox to Reform. Does the same thing happen in the Druze religion? And are the younger people perhaps moving away from the strict rules the way they are in Judaism?
Well, thank you, Alan. In terms of the younger generation, if you look at percentage-wise, the percentage of the religious people is still hasn't changed in recent years. And one more thing, most of the Druze, the elder people, once you retire, I know many people that once retired, they go and they become religious. In terms of Orthodox and non-Orthodox, I think you have this in many religions. You have different interpretations to the same words and the same in the same books. We believe in one book, and you believe in the book that you believe in, but some interpreted to the right and some interpreted to the left. So it's similar to other religions.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Shalom, Anan. I wish to ask you if, given that your wonderful son has returned, has obviously retained a high position in the army, and it's concomitant with that is that he must have the vote, as indeed you do too. And if that's not enough, that you have the vote and you can affect Israeli elections, then maybe the Druze, with all due respect to their wonderfulness, and I use that word as an invention, with all their wonderfulness, maybe they could give up some of their profits and become Jews. How's that?
Okay, I want to introduce something to you. Ayub Kara, who used to be a minister and a member of Knesset, who is from the far right, from the Likud party, but was extreme right. He suggested in one of the meetings that I was in, he suggested that the Druze might be the lost tribe, the 13th tribe, because we came from Egypt, we went through the desert, it's the same path. So we will leave that to interpretation.
Okay, Terry, your turn. Please unmute yourself, and then Morris.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, hang on, Terry. I think Shadi
I want to say something. I heard that somebody believe like Jethro become Jewish.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay, Terry, fire away.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm just interested, you set out the numbers of Druze in the various countries in Israel and surrounding Arab states. How are the Druze treated in those surrounding Arab states in places like Syria and Lebanon, given that you're clearly very entrenched and loyal to the state of Israel?
Well, they are loyal citizens to the states which they live in. I mean, in Lebanon or in Syria, in Lebanon, they're considered as a religious minority, but in Syria, they just look at view themselves as Syrians, although I think we are facing and viewing history these days because there are secret talks about dividing Syria into states similar to the United States. And one of these states might be Sueda. Sueda is the region where the Druze live in. So it's interesting, but for us in Israel, we feel very lucky, and I think most of them would pay to be in our position.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, Morris, please unmute yourself and ask your question, and then Ruthie and Debbie, that might be it.
Thank you, Anan, for a very interesting talk, a lovely talk. Mine is a matrimonial question. You touched on the issue of divorce, and a woman can easily get a divorce, complete opposite to our Jewish faith. What is the situation with the children? How is not interested in the estate, but how go the children?
Thank you, Morris. In terms of children, we are similar to the law of the state. The Druze courts deal with the divorce, non-divorce, and religious places matters, but in terms of maternity and in terms of children, they go between the father and the mother. Usually, I mean, in most cases that I know of, once divorced, basically the children are with the father on weekends from Thursday to Sunday, and with the mother from Sunday to Thursday, unless they have different situations, special situations.
Okay.
So similar to any other Israelis.
Sure. Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes left. Ruthie, can you ask a very quick question, please? Please unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself. Ruthie, we can't.
Okay. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
it.
Oh, did I?
No, start again. No, now you've muted yourself.
Okay.
This
Lovely.
is good.
All right. I thank you very much for your talk. Well, very, very interesting. I'm an Israeli, so I really appreciate, and we have lots of regards for the Druze, for you, Shadi, and for you, Anan. What I want to ask you, because to look at the influences of the Islam and Arab world on your religion, on your culture, if you can give us some idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, one might mistakenly think that the Druze are not part of the Arabs. We are part of the Arabs. We have Arab, we live by Arab culture, but we are a very unique religious minority that the state considers us to be a separate religious minority. We're not Muslims, we are Druze, but in terms of the Arab language, it is our first language, although in recent years, most of the youngsters have a sort of, I call it a Druze language, a mixture between the Arabic and the Hebrew language, for instance. Many of our youngsters, as Sami, for example, who is with us here, live in the cities, so they are far from this Arab world. But it's interesting, really. I think, although we do have Arab roots, but in the 21st century, with the globe being such a small place, and with people being able to migrate not only from one area to another within the state, but also outside the state, I think we will see a change in this matter. But as a philosophical question, we are Arabs. We speak Arabic, we live like Arab traditions, but we are loyal to the state of Israel.
Okay, look, we are coming up to time. Sorry, Debbie. We do like to keep to our time. Just before I hand over to David, I want to mention one thing. Those of you who have got, you probably can see Morris's background, Morris Klein. There's a new radio program to listen to, and it's going to start right after we finish. It's called L'Chaim with Morris Klein, and for anybody who used to listen to Shabbat Shalom on JAIR, you'll find that it's a very similar program. It's going to be lifestyle segments, current issues, music. It's on 3ZZZ in Melbourne, which is FM 92.3, and Morris's first program is right after we finish tonight. His first guest is Susan Rutland, who is the author of Izzy Liebler's biography, of course, and he also has Effie from Israel and David Schulberg speaking on media activity. So when we close, please go over to 3ZZZ and have a listen to what Morris has got to say. And
I have one more thing to say, please, Alan.
Yes.
I want to say that the spokesman or the spokeswoman of the Israeli embassy in Australia is Druze. It's a female. She's called Iman Amasha, and her husband is located. Well, her husband is a serving officer who was sent to Australia to serve there.
Yes, in actual fact, I only found out a couple of days ago that we have a Druze community in the state of Victoria, where I am. And I did reach out to them. I contacted them via their website and via their Facebook page, but didn't actually hear back. I was going to invite them to join in tonight, so I didn't hear back. But they will be able to look at the recording. Anan, Shadi, and Sami, look, it's wonderful to have you. It's been such an informative session. You mentioned at the beginning that you weren't sure if we're familiar with the Druze. I think most of us would have heard the term, the name. We know that you exist, but we didn't know much more than that. And so it's been very interesting to have you join us. And well, look, I'm proud to say that you know, Israel has got people like you. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for everything.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
Pleasure. Now,
Thank
just
you.
before we go, I'll hand over to David, who will talk a little bit about next week.
Okay, well, firstly, before we go, just to remind everyone to support AJA. If you're not yet on our email list, make sure you subscribe from the website jewishassociation.org.au, like and follow the Facebook page for our news and views items. And if you're not yet a member or haven't made a contribution, you can also do that via the website. Now, next week we have something rather different. We're not going to tell you exactly what it is because we have a high-level government official, a very high-level government official joining us. And for security reasons, we're not announcing the name of the person at the moment, but you need to trust us that it's definitely and particularly worthwhile joining in next week. Question time will also be different. There will be a different protocol, and we will be using the text function for written questions rather than having an open mic type arrangement that you've seen this evening. So a bit of a mystery for next week, but a very special mystery, let me assure you.
Okay, thanks, David. Yes, there was a little question. How do you sign up for next week? You don't need to sign up. You just need to look for the link, the Zoom link, and then that will bring you into the session. So yes, it will be interesting, and I do endorse David's comments. You won't be disappointed. So please join us next week at 8 o'clock in Australia. And thanks again to Anan and Sami and Shadi. So from me, that's all we have for tonight, and we look forward to joining you again next week. So it's good night to you all. Bye for now.